Good afternoon to everybody watching us live and who will be watching it later on YouTube. I'm Brian Bonner, Chief Editor of the Kyiv Post, welcoming you to the first edition of Kyiv Post Legal Talks in partnership with Integrity's law firm. And I want to say happy St. Patrick's Day. It's a great holiday to be talking about green energy because Ukraine is going to need the luck of the Irish on energy and even more issues today. Now, you can't get started on renewable energy without getting some numbers out of the way, and this is what I intend to do. The world today emits 51 billion tons of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere yearly, but the race is on to reduce that to zero, net zero emissions. Already, 126 nations, including Ukraine, have pledged to be carbon neutral by 2050, 30 years from today. China, the world's biggest polluter, and others have set 2060 as their target date. And why are we doing this? To avoid climate disaster. Estimates vary, but if we don't change our ways, the world's temperature is going to rise by 1 to 3 degrees by 2050 and by 4 to 8 degrees by the end of the century. Scientists disagree about what this means, but some of the best estimates are that we will lose, that 1 to 3 million people will be killed yearly starting in 2050 if we don't change, and that equals the COVID pandemic on a yearly basis. Other people say the costs are even going to be higher as we get deeper into the century, and the economic costs are still being weighed. So against that backdrop, at least it's not going to be the end of human civilization as we know it if we don't do anything, but the uncertainty and the specter of catastrophe has got the world at least talking about moving to a green future. So, bringing us to Ukraine. If there's any country that should be embracing renewable energy, it's Ukraine. For many years, we've relied on gas, oil, coal for our electricity supplies. Not only are these polluting the environment, they've been cheap when you don't count the environmental costs, but they've been polluting the environment and they've been sources of big corruption and big centralization in Ukraine, oligarchization. So the renewable energy offers a different and promising future. Clean future, decentralized future, and hopefully a cost-effective future. But it's got some big problems that it needs to solve right now. Now the final thing is I'm really reading with great interest these estimates. And again, this is the last numbers before I go to the discussion. But the world uses 5,000 gigawatts. America uses 1,000 gigawatts. 1 gigawatt powers a big city. 1 megawatt powers a small city. 1 kilowatt powers a household. There are estimates that Ukraine has the potential to generate 415 gigawatts, almost half of what the United States consumes, much more than Ukraine needs. So it could become an actual exporter of renewable energy. Also, but currently, the power capacity is 60 gigawatts, of which, that's not the same as how much is generated, it's the capacity to be generated, of which 6.5 gigawatts is renewable. So just over 10%. But to get to the green future, we have to overcome a lot of gray today. So we've got the best experts here. I want to start with Alexei Khilov, Managing Partner of Integrities. What is the state of the problem today, and what is the solution?
Thank you, Brian, and thank you everybody for joining this legal talks. One may wonder probably why we have renewables as a legal discussion, and that's not a coincidence. I think we are at the point where the legal framework and next steps to be taken by our government will be decisive for defining the renewables future over the next at least decade. I started dealing with renewables 2009. This is where the feed-in tariff was introduced in Ukraine, and it needed another decade to really see a development of renewables. So although the tariff was introduced back to 2009, a real development we've seen in 2018, 19, and less in 20, where we had discussions with the government about the future of the feed-in tariff. And as every country proved, a feed-in tariff is a kind of step in into the renewables, and then continued through different schemes like auctions, corporate PPAs, to more market prices. So this first step, the feed-in tariff which Ukraine has done, I think is super important. It gave the boost to the industry. We can say today we have a renewables industry in Ukraine. It's very diversified. We have no monopolist in that industry. We have great international developers in this industry also joining our discussion today. So I think what we would like to speak today about are two things. So really our outlook for 2050, where we want to become green generator, meaning the generation should come only from renewables. Of course, there will be storage, there will be maneuver facilities which will use conventional resources, but the main generation shall come from renewables. So to speak about a bit about this outlook, and then maybe to develop a bit what are we going to do, or what the players would suggest to do, and what the governmental and legislative side would see as steps necessary to keep that positive development in the sector. So that is from me, and yeah, please.
Okay, thanks for setting up the discussion. We do have two from the leading members of the public sector here with us. Start with them. We have three leading members of the private sector in renewables here with us. I'll start with Yuri Vitrenko, the acting energy minister. I'm glad Yuri's here because he always raises the level of the discussion, and he's a self-described contrarian who doesn't just go with the groupthink. So I've asked you this before. Yeah, Yuri, I know you'll answer it however you want, but I've asked you this before. Ukraine still owes $600 million that it promised in feed-in tariffs to renewable energy providers. This has given a black mark to Ukraine on it for investment, which is what we can ill afford. Since Ukraine is so good at borrowing, why don't we just wipe off the debt, move on, go forward? Secondly, you intrigued me by saying, you know, out of the energy sources, another one besides renewables that doesn't emit carbon is nuclear power. And contrary to public opinion, you're pretty gung-ho on that source of energy going into the future. So those are two questions I have.
So first of all, is the way we look at the renewables at the ministry is kind of a key element of the sustainable development of the energy sector of Ukraine. But first we need to make the renewables sustainable, because currently, with all due respect to all the market participants, the model that was chosen by my predecessor is not a sustainable one. And you indicated one of the parent problems, the debt. One could say that, as you say, basically, why just not to borrow and to pay the existing debt, but going into new debts to pay old debts may be tricky and not basically the sustainable solution. Especially given that the size of the problem clearly indicates that it's not a liquidity problem that should be solved with debts, it's a solvency problem. If we look at the feed-in tariff multiplied by expected production, and again multiplied by the number of years till the end of this new feed-in tariff in 2029, and then compare it with the market price, we will see that somehow the government, by and large, again, either through the state budget or through the transmission system operator, a state-owned company, should give to investors a subsidy in the region of up to $20 billion. So again, $20 billion for Ukraine.
You mean
it's
over,
not
over the life of the
yes,
feed-in tariff
till the end of
2030?
29 basically.
$2 billion a year.
So till 2029, we have to pay up to $20 billion. That's a lot of money. So making some short-term borrowings now to close the debt without any light at the end of the road is not a responsible governance and something that we cannot subscribe to. I'm not saying that we're not honoring the debts. No, it's the opposite. We're saying that in order to pay the existing debts, we should together decide on the sustainable path towards the light at the end of the road. So only then, either the government or some state-owned entities as a guaranteed buyer can borrow money, for example, to close the existing problem. And then from the next year, we have a clear plan that this financial burden should be relocated from the TSO because it's basically too much on its shoulder, and it's not the place where this burden should be placed, basically. Ukrenergo, yes, the TSO, yes. So it should be financed, at least the biggest part of it, should be financed of this compensation, should be financed from the state budget, and we can discuss what can be financed from the tariff of the TSO. But the biggest part should be financed from the state budget. There should be a new revenue source for that because the state budget has a limited capacity. So a new source for that, it's an increase, a radical increase of the carbon tax. That's we're suggesting. It's like 30 times increase. So it's a serious step. But even then it will be 3 times, yes, approximately. But even then it will be 3 times lower than EU average. So we're not lunatic. We believe it's, again, it's a reasonable proposal. And it's about climate change. So if this whole thing is not about just helping some private investors get their money back because somebody promised it to them, but if we're talking about the bigger picture, making this world a better place, again, fighting climate change, that's what should be fighting for, like, for example, carbon emissions, and increasing the carbon tax is a perfect, basically, mechanism for that.
And that'll finance renewables.
Yes, and our calculations show that such an increase that I've mentioned allows to pay this compensation, but not again through the tariff of the TSO, but from the state budget. And it will be a sustainable source. Then we're showing that the light at the end of the road. And then we say that, okay, so we have a short-term problem for 2021. We are covering basically this shortfall with basically some proceeds from a green bond issued, for example, by the guaranteed buyer. And from the next year, we have a new sustainable source that covers basically this period till 2029. And in between, we will make everything possible. First of all, that the market works properly, and this gap basically becomes narrower and narrower between the feed-in tariff and the market price. Then we also make all the necessary measures to stimulate in a market way development of renewables, but without any subsidies. And it's more than reasonable and possible and feasible, basically, because what we see a dramatic shift of the cost curve for most of renewables. And that's why we can hope that we will see some development of renewables even without any feed-in tariff. And even now we kind of have signs for that. So combined, by the way, and complemented by development of energy storage, that's a key element. I've mentioned that maybe some parts of this compensation should be paid through the tariff. But for example, if it's combined with energy storage, so if it's, for example, solar plus batteries, and then the system gets a clear benefit from it, because again, the TSO can de facto manage the batteries. So dispatchers of the TSO can use the batteries when it's really needed for frequency, basically, or just for energy to cover some peak consumption. So then the TSO can pay for the value it gets out of this combination of solar, for example, and batteries. So some smart approach will provide Ukraine with clean energy, but at the same time will be financially sustainable, or provide clean energy in a financially sustainable way. That's what we are working on, because we feel our responsibility not just towards the environment, but also towards Ukrainians, basically, and state budget. It's their money, it's not our money.
Brian, I think I have to comment here. You know, when the tariff was introduced, I believe we had 45 euro cents for solar, and it's like last year was 15 euro cents. So the tariff was always high, but we haven't seen the projects. mainly because of the lack of financing. So we haven't seen financing more or less until 2018. Why we haven't seen financing? And as you know, the biggest financial shareholder in the market is Ukgas Bank, so a state-owned bank with a clear strategy towards green energy. But the main problem always was the financing, and the financing main problem was the sustainability, predictability, the things you are talking about. So what is even more important than the tariff, it's really the accessible financing. And the accessible financing means regulations and and predictability and a clear understanding where is the source of financing, of the tariff or whatever the scheme it is. So I 100% agree with you. But even the high tariff doesn't help if we cannot establish a framework which gives confidence to the lenders.
Or if it's too high to be true,
As
they say.
Yeah, or today they say so. They haven't said so before. So before there always was question, as you say now, where the financing of the off-taker is going to take place. Is it state budget? Is it cross subsidy as used to be?
But the government was supposed to take care of this with the cuts in tariff, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so they're paying $2 billion a year, and as I understand it, renewable is the most expensive source of energy to the grid. No, it's not.
Basically, and today in Ukraine, yes. But if you look at the worldwide kind of perspective, you will see that, for example, in Norway, hydro is the cheapest, basically, and they don't consume gas, although they produce a lot of it.
Yeah.
And in many countries in the world, now renewables are the cheapest. So if you look at levelized costs of energy, they're cheaper than nuclear. They're cheaper than thermal power plants.
The capex is clearly cheaper, and if you compare to nuclear, is cheaper a few times. What I'm just trying to say
Then why do we need a feed-in tariff? If the costs are dropping
we
so
need
much.
the feed-in. So I will leave it now to you. But we need the feed-in tariff. Look, we have in the project Magnus will now present to us. We have 8 IFIs. These all 8 IFIs, including EBRD, Black Sea Trade, and so on, they all stopped financing because there is a debt of the tariff. So a banking institution cannot start lending for auctions, for corporate PPAs, for market price. If there is a debt and non-performance of the state obligation, doesn't matter whether this is feed-in tariff or something else. So there are some obligations with respect to the feed-in tariff. They must be respected, and then you can speak about next projects. If you don't respect this part, there will be no new projects. These are the same banks, the same institutions, these are the same developers.
No investment.
No investment.
Again, it's not that simple. I would
And
say,
I would leave here to Magnus, who is the investor representative here.
But I can cover it afterwards when it's my turn. But I have quite direct responses to it.
All right. No,
Yeah,
I
go
think
ahead.
jump in now is a
Go
good
ahead.
time because
Feel free.
they say no investment, but DTEC and a Danish firm just signed, I think, 450 megawatt wind farm in Mykolaiv Oblast. So the threats ring a little hollow, actually.
I think for that Marius will of course address it. But I mean, one way to look at it is one shouldn't think about the size of the tariff, but the size of the cost of financing a project under the tariff. Yeah. So a finance cost, think of a balloon. Yeah. The cost of financing is air going into the balloon, and you need a certain size to match that balloon. And for example, we are active in other countries in Southeast Europe, and say for example in countries like Romania, the interest rates with the bank is around 45%. If you go and ask for the same in Ukraine, it's almost a double. And since investments in new projects are very front-loaded, you're paying for everything up front, and then they're pretty much for free in the rest of the life, the financing cost plays in tremendously. And this is very forgotten in this discussion. Everyone looks at the tariff.
The financing cost goes to broader problems with Ukraine's economy and rule of
Both.
law. Yeah.
Yes.
How
Of
do-
course, there's an underlying component, and trouble is coming on top.
How do other countries do it then? If they're so cheap and renewables are the cheapest input into the grid, what are they doing?
Of course, basically, I can agree that the cost of capital extremely high, prohibitively high in Ukraine. It's one of the biggest problems of Ukraine, because of course it's very difficult to develop a capital-hungry, capital-intensive industry when the cost of capital is that high. And that's a problem that we should be fighting, basically, or again looking at. But sometimes. Again, it's not sustainable just to, instead of solving this problem with very high cost of capital, because of, for example, some weak rule of law and stuff, and other basically concrete explanations why we have this problem, we're just saying, okay, so we will ignore this problem of a high cost of capital, but well, the state or the state-owned entity will just guarantee such a high basically return that will cover this crazily high cost of capital. So my approach basically to solving problems is to find an underlying problem and try to solve it instead of just pretending there is no problem and trying to compensate it with creating another problem.
Okay, got it. Renewables, though, are far from perfect. Correct me if I'm wrong, since you're the expert, but sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, there's no storage, sometimes power is generated that's not even needed. Doesn't sound like it's something to build your energy grid around. Do you disagree?
Is it to me?
Yes,
No,
sir.
okay.
You're in the you're in the business.
Well, if you look at more mature markets, it is now more economically feasible to build renewable plus storage, to build the base load and what they call cut the tops, curtailment, rather than building new fossil-based base load energy sources. But really the difference is, again, going back to financing cost. So I always say that energy equals finance equals risk. So when we talk about energy in Ukraine, we should talk about risk and how to reduce the risk. And as such, you can more effectively build the future of Ukraine for less cost for the population of Ukraine.
And here I would step in if you don't mind. Because another part of your question was about nuclear, and it's a huge, basically, component of Ukrainian energy system. So it's roughly half of the capacity and half of the energy generation basically. So from that perspective, it's something we should be talking about. We want to modernize it. We want to make it more efficient, because currently, for example, the problem is that if you look at the efficiency, how much is used per how much we have, basically, we will see that we're lagging behind peers, and that's something we should be working on. And we are working on it. By the way, with, for example, Westinghouse, we are discussing with them, and they're suggesting, for example, their services and their experience, how to increase efficiency.
Maybe Bill Gates can use us as a test lab for TerraPower.
I will get in touch.
Okay, I'm sure you got it from them, or you can get it.
Yeah, and but speaking of a sustainable, again, energy grid of Ukraine, I would also agree with Magnus. It seems like, again, we have much more in common that we disagree on something.
We'll test that.
That basically solar plus storage. It's one of the important, basically, again, kind of cornerstones of the future development. But I would also say that when we say about renewables, it's not just about solar. So solar, of course, is the least reliable. But wind, for example, at least it can go, you can have some wind at night, so that helps when there are peak consumptions. Also, we're talking about biomaterial or biofuel, and we have a great potential for that. And it's very reliable, basically. So that's something I should be working on. Yes, it's maybe fossil, but at least it's renewable, because, again, it grows again and again. So a combination, again, a smart approach is a combination. So, for example, solar can be a great source of energy if it's complemented by batteries. But right now, solar, unfortunately, and I hate saying it, but I have to say it, so it basically, instead of creating some value for the grid, sometimes it just, again, brings in some damage, because especially, for example, let's look at the previous experience. Last summer, it was taking money from the market, less money to spend on, for example, coal and repairs of power plants, thermal power plants. At the same time, we cannot switch them off because we still need them. And then basically in winter, we have a deficit because there is no solar. with a deficit of energy. All the basically power plants, thermal power plants, are working at full capacity. We even have to import energy basically from electricity from Belarus and Russia, something that of course we would be keen not to do. We have to switch even our gas powered plants. It's the most expensive energy. And basically, it seems like on top of our problems with the coal generation, we now have problems, at least financial problems, with solar generation. So that's not a smart way to do things. So that's why we have to do it differently.
Okay. I'm going to keep this moving because we promised 1 hour. We will end at the hour mark, maybe. Listen, it's dangerous for you because I just read Bill Gates' book. He's got a whole chapter on government policy. You're the representative of public policy makers here, and they seem to play a key role in getting us to the green future. Ukraine has already said it's going to have renewables, 25% renewables by 2035. It's a very ambitious goal. How do you see government policy in getting us to this carbon neutral pledge? Reason why I ask that is Ukraine, I don't think I'll offend anybody here by saying Ukraine's public policy has not always been good at the long-term strategic thinking. And so there's a whole complicated series of tax incentives and disincentives that have to go into this. Research and development, also another weak area for Ukraine, and so forth. So do you have a master plan for government policy that will get us to the carbon neutral point in 2050?
Well, to begin with, I ordered the Bill Gates book, so I'm waiting for that to start reading on that. It's being delivered right now. But actually, what your question was, it was something I wanted to start talking, is that we never had a clear strategy on how we are planning to develop in this field. Not just renewables, but energy sector in general. It's my understanding that in energy, as well as in many other sectors, our general public policy approach was how do we survive the winter this year? And this approach, I can see it not only in energy sector, it's actually like everywhere. We're just trying to fix minor problems, but we are not setting ourselves higher goals. And that is, again, not just the energy policy problem. It's everywhere. We are trying to survive like this current moment, and that, of course, impedes our opportunities to speak about the further future. And of course, with renewables and with the climate change challenge, it's crucial that we do have a clear strategy for 10, 20 years ahead. And we should start working ahead of that strategy right now. And here we have been already talking a lot about the financial problems, but then I will add to this block the political problems that we also have in implementing this vision of increasing the renewables in the sector. And the political problem, of course, is that, let's face it, let's tell the truth, our political system is very much captured by the big interests that are largely represented by fossil fuel. Those are the people who are interested in keeping...
Are you talking about the three oligarchs?
Yes.
Okay.
Being representative of the party that is not, dependent upon any oligarchic funding, I am free to say that. And that is a big problem, because when we do try to speak about further strategy in bringing in the renewables, we have to be aware that the situation on the political level is as it is, and it is captured by the big interests. And I think that is one of the big advantages of the renewable sector. It is not monopolistic by its nature. It is disaggregated, and there are small producers, and that is one of the reasons why we should...
We hope.
Look,
do you think?
We hope. No,
it
is.
Fact.
Yeah,
it's a fact.
Yes, it is.
So
I can
the
tell for sure.
So the chances of oligarchization of renewable energy...
very
zero.
minor.
Minor. Okay.
Yeah, well, we never say zero, but not
Actually,
to the same
mainly
extent.
Because of the good feed-in tariff law we had, which didn't have any prioritization. Equal access for everybody, equal regulation for everybody, equal payments for everybody. If not paid, then not paid to everybody. If paid, paid to everybody. So that really helped. So I have to say we had really good law. The law itself is good. I am not speaking about the tariff, how quickly.
Just was sustainable financially.
Yeah. I mean, it was also good because from the very beginning, it foreseen a residual reduction of the tariff. So the question is, whether that 10 years ago prediction was in compliance of the greater technology development we have had in the sector. But the law was good, and actually because of that law, it helped to establish more diversified market. And today, I don't think we have a player which would have more than 15%.
Okay,
About 20.
that's good.
No,
Sorry, I
Anyways-
interrupted you with that.
Anyways, like from the political perspective and speaking about further, not just facing the climate change in Ukraine, but also in terms of political development, it's good. There is small generation, and that was actually when the changes to the legislation on feed-in tariff were introduced. That is one of the things that I was fighting for, is keeping better tariff for the smallest generation, because it's good. Again, it's for very small farms or some small companies, so that they can generate electricity themselves. That is good. It again makes them not dependent upon big oligarchic companies. But because of that, the problem is, of course, that those groups influence the policy-making process, and it's politically hardly feasible to develop a strategy when it is so much being pushed by the fossil fuel interests.
Okay.
Just last week, I came back from the east of Ukraine, and one of the regions where we have been to was Donbass. And of course, Donbass is a very problematic area overall because of the war on the east, but also because of its high dependence upon coal. What I could see there, and that again adds up another layer to the progression of the renewables, is that people believe in coal very much, and it became like a political symbol, and many people are so scared of saying no to coal that if you tell them that we should move towards a new future with the renewables, but they've been living with coal mines all their life. And there are hundreds, thousands of people who are dependent upon the mining industry on the east of Ukraine. And that is again another political problem. How do we deal with those people? How do we ensure the just transition for the coal regions so that they stop praying to this, coal god that they have been praying for years. And that is again a very big political problem, because those people are very scared. And if people are scared and that the fossil fuel companies are pushing their agenda, it's very difficult politically to squeeze in the proper strategy for developing renewables in Ukraine. It doesn't mean it doesn't need to be done, of course, and I'm very much in favor of that, and I know many members of parliament are as well. But the feed-in tariff, even if the law has been written very properly, didn't do much good in terms of the reputation of for the renewables in the parliament. I can constantly see this fight against the feed-in tariff, saying that in all this tariff hysteria in the Ukrainian parliament, feed-in tariff is one of the biggest issues that is being blamed for this growing tariffs. That is, of course, a part of the political manipulation in the parliament, but it is
Why not?
a fact.
It is a part.
It is a part, yes, but it's not.
So is
not
it no
the-
manipulation?
No, of course, but it's
Currently,
not the major part.
Households are paying more as compensations to renewables that they're paying for actual electricity generated by Energatom and consumed by them. It's not sustainable.
No, yeah, I'm not
So
saying
this
it is.
compensation, not the value of electricity, the compensation is basically 20 kopics, and the energy itself is 15 kopics. Can you imagine?
Yeah, and it is a problem. I'm not, again, I'm just saying that it is doing a bad favor for the renewables, because it is seen as a major damage to the welfare of the people right now. And again, it is being used in political debates internally in the parliament. So in addition to the financial problems we are seeing, I'm seeing huge political challenges for this in
That's
the parliament.
global. At the risk of asking a stupid question, what happened to auctions, which were supposed to start 2 years ago, it never did?
I think that is on the governmental
Yes,
side.
on my side, and frankly, I'm just reluctant to take on more commitments while we're struggling to fulfill existing commitments. So call me old-fashioned, But again, just to be able to look into eyes of investors, I need to solve this problem just to make sure that there are no existing debts before basically I take on some additional financial burden. I understand that there are investors who would like to invest, meaning again, give or invest some money now with some guaranteed return in the future. They're earning money in such a way. But again, sorry, we have to deal with the existing problem first because before we create a new problem. And we don't want to create the new problem in general. So instead, we want to fix the problems in the market so that investors in renewables can invest but take also the market risk. So they have to invest in this generation, meaning that then they will sell this electricity to the market at the market price, not at some subsidized tariff. At the market price, will get their money and again will get the required return on their investments. That's how it works in a proper economy in a civilized world.
Okay. We have two speakers from the private sector who have been waiting patiently for the first half hour. I'm going to turn over to Maras Konikis, DTEC's head of renewables. DTEC is the largest private energy company in Ukraine. You've been listening to the discussion. I'm sure we have a lot of questions, but the floor is yours, Maras. Can you hear us?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I deeply heard your discussion, and actually I have a couple of points what to comment. First of all, if we speak about renewable energy, we are not speak about only renewable energy itself separated from whole energy sector. In Europe, this is not only trend or only green vision or CO2 reduction plan. This is also plan how we substitute existing conventional generation with new environment-friendly renewable generation. And as Mr. Minister said, that's correctly, that's levelized cost of electricity now is dropped very significant for renewable generation, even over speed all another conventional generation. So most cheaper generation now in Europe, this is renewable generation. And there is the question not about only following the trends in Ukraine or switching to renewable just to reduce the CO2 emission, but this is about, this discussion is about future of whole generation mix in Ukraine. And we know that our conventional generation is 40, 30 years old and still depreciating. And what we have to do after 10 years when we wouldn't have any new generation. And this is actually political choice to set proper rules how to develop whole sector, develop, yes, based on economical viable principles. And I agree that if we speaking about future developments, we're speaking about renewable generation, which is based on more market prices. Yes, but this is if we speak about future. But we have one problem today. This is existing historical debt and existing payments. As we see from all last things what's happened with this historical debt that we could definitely fix today. That's memorandum what has been signed last year in July, and also principles what has been written in the law 810 is not fulfilled yet. So we didn't receive this historical debt 40% in last year, and we do not see any movements for receiving this 60%, which is written in the law in this year. So there is no sources for this debt, and this make also us very concerned regarding future of renewable generation sector in Ukraine. And first of all, I fully agree with Minister. So we should solve this issue first, and then discuss how to develop a future green energy sector in Ukraine. And that is my first question to Minister. Maybe if you could answer to this. Do you have a particular plan how to solve this issue with historical debt? Why we are concerned of this? Because we, like biggest private investor, invest 1.2 billion euro in renewable sector. Our installed capacity is close to 1 gigawatt. And of course, we attract the financing for those investments. So we have been issued first green bonds for Ukraine investors, 325 million euros. And we invest these green bonds in renewable sector. And of course, investors are looking for us and asking what's happening. And now I just can highlight that what has been discussed before. So definitely, so all institutions, all finance institutions, banks, and also another funds now looking very suspicious to Ukraine because there is no solution for this historical debt and existing situation. And I think that everybody are struggling. There is no big future developments here in Ukraine because of you cannot just attract the debt for your projects. Debt with proper size of interest rate, as has been mentioned. So this is 3-4 times higher than in Europe average. So, and if we're speaking about future developments, yes, definitely we are so saying that in future, so the possible developments can be rely on market principles. But to get this market principles, so first of all, we should stabilize the system, stabilize this system in terms of financial stability, and give this proof for our financial institutions that Ukraine is stable market for future developments, and you could invest money here in Ukraine to future growing of renewable electricity sector. So, yeah.
Brief answer, basically, but the direct one. The solution is the following. So we have a quota or some earmarked amount in the state budget. It's 24 billion hryvnia for the issuance of the state guaranteed green bonds. That's what we intend to do this year, and it will cover, in combination of the previous basically financial solution through Ukrenergo, in the total amount of 10 billion hryvnias. So in total, a part of the previous instrument and this new one, green bonds, will allow us to fully close the historic debt in 2021. But as I mentioned, for us, in order to issue these bonds, we have to show the light at the end of the road, because otherwise it will be just digging this debt hole deeper and deeper. That's not what we want to do. But if we basically make it in a combination of finding a sustainable solution from the next year and can increase of the carbon tax and issuance of these green bonds this year, it will allow us to solve both the current or the historic problem with debt and basically have a sustainable option to see the light at the end of the road.
Can I ask about that, because I was meaning to ask before. When you say about the carbon tax increase, well, I have my issues whether that will be passed by the parliament, and that is a separate discussion. But the technical problem would be the monitoring system for the carbon emissions, which is not present at the moment. We had previous increases in carbon emission taxes, and they hadn't resulted in huge revenues to the budget, simply because we don't have the proper monitoring system. So what is being done in that matter?
There are many problems, technical problems and political problems. Of course, basically making somebody pay some, again, radically higher tax rates, it's a problem, especially if we are talking about powerful political groups represented in the parliament. But then, since the parliament basically created this obligation, this feed-in tariff in the first place, probably the parliament is the best place to deal with finding basically a sustainable source to finance this feed-in tariff that the parliament basically introduced. So from that perspective, again, we're just giving the ball to the court where it belongs and let you deal with the problem. Again,
Yuri, does it mean that
Thank
you
you.
are going to raise the green bond after the law on the increase of the carbon tax has been passed? Is that the interlink?
not really, but it can be done in parallel. But the intention is very simple. So when you buy basically some bonds, you want to see how you will be repaid. And if we're talking about long-term bonds, we have to show some long-term future. We cannot just say, look, we really need to give this money to these guys right now. That's why give us this money, but don't ask questions how we will pay you. Maybe in future we will deal with this problem. We will take money from somebody else to pay to you. It doesn't work like this. So to these guys, we also have to show how this bond will be repaid. So we need to show them something. And as, for example, Ina mentioned, again, the political process also takes some time, so we have to start doing it in parallel. And hopefully, basically, there will be some synergy, because when we issue this bond, we tell the investor that the sustainable solution is with carbon tax increase. But at the same time, when we're increasing the tax, we're saying that we're also solving the short-term problem, or the historic problem.
I think the carbon tax increased justification lies in the cross-border carbon tax to be introduced by the EU.
Already
So
introduced, yes.
It's the main, probably the main argument. If you don't tax it in Ukraine, it will be taxed in the EU. So it doesn't make really a lot of sense.
External control
Yeah.
or motivation, however you want to look at
It's
it.
a push factor, right?
Yes, it would seem to motivate.
Yeah,
Mars,
but from what I know, at the time, right now, the position of Ukraine in negotiations with the European Union is to make sure that we are not subject to the cross-border carbon taxation.
that's going to be a very
Yeah.
interesting political
No.
exercise because the world is going one way. Mars, the DTEC.
We're trying to do that.
Want to ask you a couple questions. DTEC has announced, this very ambitious goal of becoming carbon neutral itself by 2040, 10 years ahead of the rest of the country. Yet, you're the biggest coal, have the biggest coal producer.
Coal thermal production.
Right.
Generation too.
And potentially the biggest payer of the carbon tax.
Yes.
Yes. How do you plan to do this? And you agree with there should be a high carbon
Yeah,
tax?
of course. Yeah, we announced our Renew strategy in December last year, and in this corporate strategy, we announced that yes, we are looking in line with European companies, and we are sharing these principles, and we don't see the future for carbon-intensive industry in the energy sector, and taking into account what I have mentioned before regarding the lowest leverage cost of electricity, we see the only proper investments in future generation mix is in renewables, because first of all, this is economically cheaper and viable, and second, of course, this is environmental issues, CO2 reduction, etc. And in our strategy, we are supposing to do this step by step. So we understand that the future for coal generation is 10 years, maybe a little bit more, but step by step, it should be substituted by renewable, clean, and affordable energy in terms of prices. And yes, we are ready to became carbon neutral in 2040 by doing investments step by step. And here we are talking not about investments only in Ukraine, but also DTEC has announced the international expansion. And we are now very strongly looking to investments in Europe, in the European Union, especially in renewables, so wind and solar. We are looking to different countries. We are creating our company in Europe for this purpose. And actually, if Ukraine situation will not show improvement in terms of stability, so we will do our choice in favor of stable countries in Europe. So, but anyway, if we're speaking about common installed capacity, yes, 2040, we see us as big scale power utility which generates carbon-free kilowatt hour.
Well, that offers promise to policymakers and a bit of a warning too. So I'd be remiss, and this will be my final question. DTEC is owned by Renat Akhmetov, the richest billionaire in Ukraine with
7.
dominant position in energy. Fear is that he's going to monopolize renewable energy. Is that possible?
Sorry, there is poor sound. Could you please repeat?
People are concerned when Rinat Akhmedov gets involved that there's going to be an oligarchization of renewable energy and he's going to emerge as the dominant player.
No, definitely I don't agree with this statement, because also today we are not major players. Our share in market is less than 18% only, and this is so we cannot see that we are monopolized this renewable sector. Even in argue from our side, so we are looking for fair game principles. So based on stable system. Also, as I was speaking before, we are not saying that future development of renewable energy should be based on feed-in tariffs as it is in Europe. So it should be find new mechanism, or it is corporate PPA, or this is market price, or this is auctions, also possible as still is ongoing in Europe. So we are looking for transparent principles for future development in Ukraine, and based on competition, of course. And one of the signal why we are not saying about monopolization, we are going to Europe, and we see if Ukraine doesn't provide this transparent environment for development with principles which is understandable for next 10 years. So we will do our invest in other countries.
Green sounds great. Let's hope it happens in 2040, because I
Right.
might live
Can I
to see that.
ask you?
I have to go. One thing. The Patience Award here goes to our last speaker, Adrian Fouché, country manager of Eurocape. Adrian, I hope you're still there. And
Yep.
dive
Here.
in, please. We would love to hear your views.
No, thank you. Thank you. So yeah, in fact, I represent Eurocape, and we've invested for around 10 years in this country. And together with the Vitol Group, through VLCR and GE Capital, we have started the construction of a 500 megawatt project. The fact is that today, this 500 megawatt project cannot be finalized because of the current situation. But we have decided to build 100 first, and we are ready to go on for whatever is possible. The fact is, the last 1.5 years, we have spent a lot of time in discussion. But I'm happy that today I hear we share the same goal. We have signed a feed-in tariff contract with the government, which is valid for all our projects. But we are ready to review our copy if needed. Last year, we have signed an MOU, and we see that today it's still not implemented. So just when I look at this conversation, I think we share the same goal, but we have to understand that, in fact, it's a circle, yeah? Ukraine has to fulfill its commitment. That's the base, that's what's requested by all institutions. We have DFC, who is, as you know, funded by the American government, which is financing our projects. They expect this commitment because we took commitment to them. This commitment will result in a stability. And that's the same for the other market player. Yeah, we all accept this stability. And only with this confidence, finally, the institution can continue to commit to Ukraine. So again, feed-in tariff is not a goal. It's just a mean to build the confidence. We are ready for the auction. We are ready to review the way we build projects, the access to market. But we need first Ukraine to fulfill its goals and the current commitment. So I understand from the minister that it's a step one to repay all the debt. We accept to move on as soon as possible to the next steps, yeah, which is putting in place a MOU that can be done even in parallel entirely, not just the repayment of the debt. And I heard that, Mr. Minister, you're not a fan of auction, but when you look at, for example, Poland, which is just close by, I mean, thanks to the auction, the energy sold by renewable energy is 15% cheaper than the market price, yeah, even during the COVID time. So auctions can be a way, there may be others, but we definitely should think out of the box to close this difficult situation.
So you're on hold until there's a solution, until Yuri and Ina's group that she represents.
That's the issue. There is today no possibility for an international investor having access only to international money to commit in Ukraine. We want to commit. We did a big commitment. I mean, the last 10 years, we have spent a lot of money in the country, a lot of efforts, and we have convinced also international partners to join us in this. It's what, in fact, most of the private investors do. We spend our time convincing others that Ukraine is a country which makes sense. And I can say that at several levels, a lot of things have evolved positively. But this last 1.5 years, discussing, circling around signed contracts, that's breaking confidence. Yeah, it's again, I understand it's not the government in place which has signed this contract, but it's the same state, and we committed 10 years. Through whatever happened, we expect from Ukraine to do the same.
We're at the free-for-all stage of this discussion, so have at it, guys. We got 10 minutes.
A few comments. Related to your question to Maris about monopolization of the market, and linking to what Adrian just said. In the current market, there's about 1/3 local sort of oligarch financed, 1/3 local, regional, every level, and 1/3 international. That's the renewables market. And as always, the international has a bit of a lag effect, so they come in a bit later. And what is a bit interesting to see is that actually, if things would be going a bit smoother, the international component would probably grow larger than the local, or at least in the wind sector, because wind industry requires larger investments, more sophisticated investors,
And longer time.
and longer time to develop, etc. So I mean, the market was now in the process of internationalizing itself in Ukraine. And now you can hear, of course, from Adrian that this is an example how also the internationals are the more sensitive ones to dynamics in Ukraine, right? Because those who are from here, they know the volatility more to their heart.
But they put it on hold.
Exactly.
This is what I'm fearful of. The world is going one way, and it seems like Ukraine is going the opposite way, because we're going to miss out on this investment.
Construction of new solar capacities basically exceeded all the plans and all the expectations. So again,
True.
Yes,
believe me,
solar,
basically currently
yes.
it's more than the dream scenario. And we are exceeding all the international levels, all the European levels, because basically the feed-in tariff is just kind of generous. And I'm not saying that we should not fulfill our obligations. I'm just, again, saying that it was attractive enough to build basically capacities that exceed all the expectations. And now, by the way, again, we see some signs of development even without any feed-in tariffs and without any auctions. And with the falling costs, we can expect that it will grow. The biggest problem at the time is basically the cost of capital. Should we resolve this problem, we will see a huge growth of renewables in Ukraine, especially given that in Ukraine it's still rather easy, if compared, for example, to Europe, to get land for a wind park or for a solar park. In richer countries like in Germany, they don't want to build wind plants just because it ruins their landscape. They just say like, we don't want it. Or, for example, people at the seaside of some North Sea, they say, look, we want to see on the look at the open sea, not at this wind farm. So, again, they can afford it.
Are you saying the investors are bluffing when they say we're not going to invest?
No, just saying investors want money. That's kind of clear. I mean, I was an investment banker myself, so that's a very rational behavior. I'm not criticizing them. And I do see a problem. When you promise and don't fulfill your promise, it's a good sign for future investors. That's not something that you should be doing. At the same time, again, my approach to solving problems was always to be honest. And if there is a problem, you should say, look, there is a problem, we are solving it, and solve this problem. As with Naftogaz, for example, there was a time where we could not repay the debt, we restructured it, but then we repaid it in full in 2014. So it's better than just to promise and not to deliver. So my point is very simple. We shouldn't be lying to investors. We should be saying that, yes, there is a problem, but just hold on a second, we will solve it, and we will have a sustainable way of developing renewables in Ukraine.
Okay.
Oh.
Maris and Adrian, jump in anytime you want. Sorry, we're here, so we tend not to see you, but please jump in.
Just
Go
a
ahead.
bit about solar and wind. So wind, Eurocape is 14 years, NBT is younger, but the projects are old, and many international players, and average is up to 10 years to develop a wind project here. And we spend, when the government started negotiations over the tariff, like everything stopped. I spent few months persuading international players not to start in international arbitrations, investment arbitrations, but to start negotiations. Then we failed actually. We couldn't do this with the until actually the acting minister and Schmigel government was appointed. So then we actually reached a deal with that government, and that that held back the investors from last resort actions. And then everybody hoped to see the implementation of the MOU. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. So which means for 1.5 years, not a single new wind project got financing, except DTEC, where they also may land on the bonds may raise also on the corporate guarantee. So if you speak about project financing, there was no single project financing happening since then. So that's the upside which we have, the downside which we have now, and whether that will continue, meaning the investors will withdraw, will write off the investment, whether they go or not go to the investment arbitration, that's another issue, but they will just withdraw and maybe look again into the country in 10 years. What will happen in that time, we don't know. Maybe local players will evolve, maybe not, but that's a scenario we of course would like to avoid, to show the predictability in the policy and smooth transition, and this transition is painful, but we need to manage it, and we achieved a lot already with the MOU, with the law 810. We achieved a lot. We need now to make the final step. There is no solar tariff anymore. There will be only 1 year a bit more than 1 year for the wind. So we need to go smoothly through that period to ensure future development with the auctions, with the corporate PPAs, and all these modern support schemes we have.
But this is gloom and doom. I would not agree. First of all, let's just state the fact that all the renewables producers are getting at least the full market price. And if you think that you should take it for granted, no, because in other sectors of energy and electricity, some producers are not getting basically even the full market price. So you can ask, for example, DTEC, they are struggling to get for power, for example, for thermal power plants, or Energatom, let's take Energatom, they're not getting basically even the market price. So all investors are getting the full market price. And again, there was this facility at the end of the year from Ukrenergo, 10 billion hryvnia. There was basically the first, I would say tranche, more than 5 billion hryvnia. It was split 50-50 between Energatom and Renewables. So Renewables basically got around 3 billion hryvnia. So some debts were paid. So basically, again, they're getting the full market price at the moment, plus some historic debts paid. It's not basically the full amount they were promised. I acknowledge this problem, and that's something that we should be working on.
I was speaking about new projects. Because of that, no new projects happen. I just mentioned this.
But this
Which been developed for 10 years. Like Eurocape,
the Mykolaiv, okay.
out of 500 megawatt, only 100 done and then stop.
Mark.
Can I comment also for this one? Yes, definitely. If we are speaking about government fulfillment of obligations, so we see that only current payments are improved since August last year. So from historical data, which is written in the MOU, so 40%, we got only 18% in March this year. So this is not fulfilled. So 60% also is divided by quarters, and now will be ended first quarter, but we see any movement. So we have heard about this green bonds issuing state guarantee, but we have heard this in last 3 or 6 months, but we didn't see any movements on this. So then I would ask one more time question to Minister. Do you really believe that you could achieve these promises to pay this historical debt in this year? Because as we see from history, in last 6 months we have heard only discussion about this, but any real movements, only this 18% payment from 40. This is first question. If we're speaking about we are receiving this market price like any other renewables in Europe. Yes, it's correct, but any, as is discussed before, any renewables in Europe are paying interest rate for financing this debt 2%, even less. We are paying 4, even 5 times higher in Ukraine due to this country risk and due to how to investors look on Ukraine. And this is not give us equal situation with another players in other part of Europe. This is just my comment on this financial issues. So, and I still want to raise this question regarding to Mr. Vitrenko. Do you believe that you could achieve this historical debt payment of this year?
It's very difficult for me to predict the future of this kind. Because I was twice in the parliament. My basically candidacy was proposed as the Ministry of Energy, and was twice voted no. For example, Ina voted 2 times no. So that's why basically, and I got my full mandate, kind of full mandate, only last week. So of course, again, for me, it's very difficult to predict the future of such complex and sometimes politically difficult developments.
Well, we've only had 7 energy ministers in 7 years. You know, why aren't you voting yes to Yuri? He's so educated. He's got a plan.
Yeah,
what's the problem?
He's a nice guy. It's nothing personal, Yuri. You know that. I would say this, that this is not the issue, and I get the position that Yuri is in here, right? He has to be responsible, to be held responsible for the problems that have been generated in this sphere for years before, and that this is not the problem that one person can solve. There needs to be a general consensus among many stakeholders, both in the parliament, in the government, in the private sector, everywhere, that we all need to understand that we are all together in this boat. And yes, we need to fulfill our obligation. There is no one saying that we shouldn't, but we also shouldn't go bankrupt while doing that. And that is also clear.
Do you have a candidate for energy minister?
We are not in the coalition. We are not forming the government.
You give me a name. I mean, we need some leadership, and we have a deficit of leadership in the energy sector historically, and now we're trying to catch up to the green future. I mean, do you got somebody you will vote for this job?
At the moment, the Golos Party position is that we are not forming the government. That is the coalition's job. And if the coalition does not have enough votes for forming the government, then we should discuss whether we do have the coalition in the parliament.
Well, 226 votes are all this
Yes.
needs. But anyway, I'll digress. You're a lawyer. Why don't you? This looks like a slam dunk case. Yuri knows things about arbitration, and you got the government cold. File the lawsuit, collect the money, get the big payday.
You know, we are very afraid of this, because that would ruin, although many believes, you know, like renewable sector is a desert where you can do whatever you want and that will not impact the overall investment climate. I've been advising foreign investors in Ukraine for the last 20 years, and all these investors I see in the renewables, they are cross-sectoral. So how can I explain to NBT shareholders who are from very different sectors, come into Ukraine, invest into agriculture, invest into leisure, invest into other sectors, you know, if NBT is reporting the government is not keeping with on the obligations. So, you know, starting investment arbitrations, the case the most ridiculous case we had with Spain, that would be really a disaster for Ukraine. That killed the renewables development in Spain for 10 years. I don't know for how long it would kill in Ukraine, and it would have, in any case, huge negative impact on the overall foreign investments. We are speaking about Eurocape, where we have DFIG, which is a US governmental political insurance company, you know, involved in this project. So how they are going to expand great plans over Ukraine if they, you know, one of the major and first project in renewables would fail. So I don't want to concentrate on this at all. I want to work that we bring together investors and the government, and that we work out a plan which is sustainable, which everybody believes in, and we move on. So that's really, we achieved it with the MOU and the law. We have now, I believe, less part to resolve than we had last year, and I am sure we can do it. And I agree, better we have a minister than we have nobody, even if this is, in terms of parliamentary republic, makes sense, but it doesn't make sense, to resolve the crisis we have in the electricity and in the energy market as such. So that's why now we are thinking only towards, so we will offer our support to drafting the laws, to drafting the bylaws, to find, involving the best practices. I don't want to speak about the contra scenario. It's really, we are really not there to effort something like this.
Okay. Our time is more than up. If there's a final word by anybody, I will welcome it. Otherwise, I will just close with, there's a whole lot of investment out there. I mean, international financial institutions, pension funds, investment bankers, who are completely shifting to the green investments and away from coal, away from oil, away from gas.
It became a corporate value. It became a corporate value for many corporate structures who are not in the renewables. Many who are just manufacturers, they need clean electricity for their production. So if they look at the Ukraine as a destination place to set up a factory, they will say, do I have access to green electricity? Because it's my corporate value, I need to keep on. So that's really much more than just the industry.
Our answer has to be yes.
As an acting minister, I want to assure basically that we in our government see a very bright future for renewables in Ukraine. And we welcome all the new investments, but for the existing investments, we will do everything possible from our side to honor our obligations and again to find a sustainable solution to all the existing and historic problems. That's our duty towards Ukraine, and we are very serious about that.
Let's end it on a high note then.
If
Go
I may.
ahead.
Yeah, well,
You
first
may.
of all, I want to thank our host here for
Thank you.
hosting this debate. I think that is very much timely and very much needed, and I do very much hope that we shall have similar discussions in the Parliament together with the Ministry, because we do indeed need to try to solve the current problems all together in order to build the better green future for Ukraine. So I think that should be the very first step, and I just want to reiterate once again that this is not the problem that can be solved by one minister, one parliament. It's an issue we need to be working on as a country for the next 20 years. So there should be a consensus, and discussions like this are the way to build this consensus.
Okay, definitely won't be the last discussion, but I hope it advanced understanding of the issue. And I want to thank Alexei Filip and Integrities for making this happen. I want to thank all of our speakers. I want to thank the busy Energy Minister and Ina Sassoon for coming in and representing the public sector. I want to thank the private investors. So let's hope for a greener future for Ukraine on St. Patrick's Day and every other day. Thank you for joining Kyiv Post Legal Talks. I'm Brian Bonner, Chief Editor. We'll see you next time in 2 weeks. We are talking about non-performing loans, piles of bad debt. Ukraine's got a lot of it, so we'll be here March 31st. Thank you.